So, Kevin, welcome back.
Sure.
Thank you. I really
It's a
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
I enjoy my time, and I'm so delighted that it worked into your schedule.
Yeah, well, thank you. I got to tell you, out of all the episodes I've done, I get the most, not the most compliments, but the most specific takeaways from people from our first episode that we did together. I just think people are not used to a mind like yours. You have an incredible, incredible mind. And I'm really excited to dig in with you. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. And I have to start by saying congratulations on the Kickstarter campaign.
Sure. So for those who don't know, I'm in the middle of a Kickstarter campaign funding a oversized, crazy big book of photographs that I took over 49 years. And they are pictures of a tradition, ceremonies, costume, architecture of Asia that's disappearing, that's vanishing. And these are the ancient ways of doing things. And so I made a huge book out of it. It's so large, I had to divide it into 3 oversized books. And that's what's going on right now. It's called Vanishing Asia.
It's incredible. And you've got over at the point of this recording, April 8th, you've got about $350,000 raised and
Right.
1,400 backers. So your 1,000 true fans showed up.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I began with the premise that I first wrote about the 1,000 true fans before Kickstarter. It was just sort of an idea. And it was more of a theory when I first wrote it. And then since then, many people have proven that it works, but I had not yet kind of exercised it myself. And so my initial kind of goal with the Kickstarter was to get 1,000 backers, 1,000 fans, which I did achieve. And that is very, what's the word I want? Exhilarating to see it kind of like prove itself. And so now I have my 1,000 true fans, and there were 1,000 true fans. And so it's really very invigorating to have it confirmed in that way.
It really must be. Must be just such a nice feeling to know that you have these. And it's funny because Kickstarter calls them backers, but they are really, they're backers. You are a creator. You're a brilliant mind, and you're also creating, you're an artist, you're a photographer, you're doing all these things. And to know that throughout life, these fans are going to come and back you with whatever project you put out into the world is a beautiful thing. I bought it, so I'm one of your true fans.
Well, okay, you're one of my fans. Well, thank you so much. I will tell you that you will not be disappointed, because there is no other book like this in the world. I'm in the middle of a 2-story library, and there are no other books in the world like this book, with 9,000 images and so many pages. And so you will not be disappointed. I'm so glad that you went to the ride. And it's, I was just thinking about the origins of this project, and the honest truth is that the book was made for an audience of one, which was me. I wanted to own this book, and if I had just one copy, I would have satisfied it. But since I'm making one copy, I'll just make a lot of them and share them. And so for me, this whole thing is a matter of maximizing the number of people sharing it. I'm not trying to maximize the income. I'm trying to maximize the number of people who actually get it. So I kind of adjusted the price, and particularly the Kickstarter prices, to make sure that as many people could get it without, me losing money on it. So that is what I'm trying to do. Is I made the book for me. You made it, enjoy it, and I think you will. And the more people that can enjoy it, the happier I am.
Spoken like a true author. The audience of one, it's like it's a beautiful thing when you create something for yourself. And I think often we create to discover what we know. We create to discover how we see the world.
Absolutely.
Flannery O'Connor said, I write to discover what I know.
And
It's a
that's a
beautiful
line
thing.
I independently invented, that very same line. This book has very few words in it. It's 9,000 images and some captions for every one, but still minuscule writing. But when I write to figure out what it is that I think. It's not like I know what I think, I'm going to write it down. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I'm thinking, and I have to write it out to uncover, discover what I'm thinking. And it's a way of thinking, really.
It makes me think a lot about the science of creativity, which so many books have been written about. And it's such a fascinating concept. But I'm the same. I not only write to discover what I know, but I often speak to discover what I know. I
Sure.
often find that these conversations for me bring to the surface ideas and thoughts that I never knew existed. They were somewhere floating around in the space of my mind. And
Right, right.
it's a beautiful thing. But when it comes to your book, so I'm really excited. I had to get it. I recommend everybody watching and listening to get it. It will be up for the next, I think, 25 days on Kickstarter, and maybe longer, because we were talking about an idea. If we do that as well, and help you with that. But the question that I think a lot of people asked when they first read, your theory of the 1,000 true fans was, and I think they continue to see that, and now you've proven it. How does one truly begin to acquire these true fans? What type of communication, what type of work, what type of process begins to take somebody from just this lukewarm admirer to a true fan who truly shows up for you? Like, because the world can be an incredibly abundant place if every creator, and we're moving toward this creator economy, if every creator had their 1,000 true fans, they could essentially be free. And I
Yeah.
think everybody wants that. So how does one
Right,
go
right,
about
right.
that process?
So one of my theoretical correlates in the 1,000 true fan theory was that, given the population of the planet in several billion adults, that even if your personal idiosyncratic passion appealed to only 1 in a million people, there are still 1,000 people on the planet who will crave what you're doing, right? So the weirdest, most obscure, most niche thing has the potential of 1,000 rabid fans on the planet. So the challenge is to connect with them. How do we match up them? Because they may be in Jakarta, they may be in Buenos Aires. You don't know, and so the challenge becomes how do we match up? These creators, niche creators in the long tail, and the fans who are in the long tail, and they find each other. What we know is, like, places like Kickstarter are not the place that happens. You have to have your fans going and being connected, and then you kind of ignite them, or you bring them to Kickstarter, basically. So the process of connecting with those, I think, first of all, is my guess is that it doesn't happen fast, that it happens over time. So I would stress this idea that this is a slow success rather than a fast success, and it's accumulative. So the way you do it is you kind of do it one fan at a time. But if you said, well, maybe it takes me 10 years to get there. 10 years, that's 100 fans a year. That's one fan every 3 days. It's like, well, you can kind of pay attention to that. That's enough to pay attention to. And one of the things I'm learning through the Kickstarter thing that I need to do more of, in kind of response to you, is I would like to be able to I should be able to thank you and connect with you directly. Now that I know you're a true fan, I need to take the time to go through to see who the backers are, to not just do a mass mailing, but to have a personal relationship. Because I think 1,000 is within the realm of having some direct intercourse with each other. It's not, I think the way I'm answering your question. And so it's like you have 100 true fans. The way you get to 1,000 is you have 100 that you keep happy.
Mm-hmm.
And you keep them happy because you have to have some relationship with them. I think it's not possible to maintain that 1,000 true fan without having some of you be given in it. And by the way, that's the price of this path. The price of this path is it's going to take a lot of you to do it. And many creators say, I don't want to do that. I want to just keep painting. I want to go back into my studio. I don't want to have to tend to my fans. Okay, that's fine. You'll have an intermediate. You'll have to have more than 1,000 true fans. And so I don't think it's necessarily the course for everyone at all times in their lives. It's another option. And because the price, the cost of maintaining that is going to come from you and your time. And you have to be willing to give part of you to that process.
It really is an exchange of yourself and of your time. So
Right.
for you, how, through what medium do you best connect with your fans? Is it email? Do you have an email list? Like, what is your preferred way to stay in communication? Because I have noticed that piece around what you said, people will admire my work, but I'm all over the place. It's like an email list and an Instagram and over here and over there. And
Right.
there's so much for people to pay attention to that I think some of those true fans I had, say, 6 years ago, I have no idea where they are. I've lost communication with them. And of course, it's like they've moved on to other ideas and other people and other creators that are interesting. And so I'm curious if you think there's an ideal way to best cultivate that relationship so that when the time comes for you to go to Kickstarter, you can easily communicate that and people would be willing to jump on that immediately. Like, how did you go
Yeah.
about doing it?
Yeah. Well, I didn't have a kind of 1,000 true fan list. I had a previous Kickstarter campaign, which was successful in raising the amount of money for a graphic novel. I naturally mailed to them. So, and I'm not sure there's going to be a kind of a single method for everybody or some canonical universal way to maintain 1,000 true fans. I think it would depend, but I would say that it's something that you probably want to exercise. I think it's sort of like it's like other things. The more you exercise it, and by exercising it, I mean I do have a list of people, and I send every year a letter and a book that I make to that one list. And so in that sense, it's like I'm sharing myself with them. I'm not asking for anything in return. I'm just sharing myself. And so that's part of the exchange in a certain sense. I think if I may be so bold to say that I think if your 1,000 true fans, if it only goes in one direction, where you're just asking them all the time, I don't think that works for the long term. I think it has to be where you are kind of giving to the true fan. And that's part of maybe why they want to be your fan.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think you can do that more formally, like my friend Craig Maude, who runs 1,000 True Fans for his livelihood. He likes to do things with office hours where he is kind of, opening up and saying, if you're a member, come chat with me for a while, or whatever it is. It's almost a one-on-one thing. I think that kind of thing, again, it's taking from yourself, it's giving of yourself. It's expensive in that way. And I think there is no way around that for the long term. If you were going to sustain a relationship over time, it has to be two-way. And that may be different for every person in terms of what they understand, but it should be a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it's expensive. And I think that obviously, as we all know, our time is the most valuable asset and it's non renewable. And so it's very challenging to give it up. You don't strike me as someone who is just constantly sitting in Zoom meetings all day. But so I'm curious, with all the amount of research and
Uh,
creativity that you have going on, what is a good balance for you in terms of, internal time with the self versus external time with others? How do you balance that for yourself?
yeah, it's a very important question too. I would agree. Well, I'm a maker. I have been all my life. I like to make things. Before this Kickstarter started, I was involved in moving to where I think the culture is moving to, which is to the moving image, away from the book. I'm doing this Kickstarter somewhat reluctantly because I wanted a New York publisher to publish a book. It wouldn't do, in the end, even for the New York publisher, my experience is that you still wind up, the author still winds up doing most of the marketing and most of the other stuff because book publishers don't have an audience anymore. No one's walking into bookstores buying books. And
Right.
so economically and otherwise, I wouldn't have done as well with a New York publisher, but Kickstarter and things like 1,000 True Fans are a full-time job that I did not want to take on. I was doing other
Mhm.
things. I didn't want to interrupt these other things and do this full-time crowdfunding, which is a full-time job. And so, but my book was turned down by Taschen, even though I had published my first book with them, because they are also pivoting from COVID and from, who's walking into big bookstores and buying big books? Nobody.
Mhm.
And so this is a long way of saying that I was engaged in making video on a YouTube channel for Cool Tools and for myself. I was making things in my workshop and making maker videos. I turned that to making the videos for the Kickstarter, which was a lot of fun and part of how I, get out of Zoom calls and make things. And so for me, making physical things and making a book, by the way, is very, very physical. So we made a prototype. In fact, I might release a video where I made a prototype and bound it myself, did bookbinding on the prototype, a smaller miniature version of the prototype, just to see how thick it was going to be, to get the order of the pages in the end notes. There's a little bit of complication in a book in the very beginning and back, and I needed to sort that out. So I made a hand-bound prototype of this, which again satisfies some of my maker needs. So I try to make things continue that process as much as I can, because I find working with my hands to be a great counterpoint to working with my brain.
Mm, interesting. And that's it. That's gosh, that's just like a dying craft. We just do not see people really working with their hands the way that they used to. Lot less makers than there used to be. Everyone's
True.
outsourcing the next task to.
Yeah, and it is true that there are probably less, but at the same time, the tools for making things yourself have never been better and more accessible. And more importantly, the instructions and the knowledge has never been as prevalent as it is now. Just go on YouTube. So
Hmm.
I think the combination of YouTube plus Amazon, where you can buy anything, is
Hmm.
like revolutionizing the making world, because without either of those, it was impossible to do these things. When I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, if you wanted to, I don't know, do anything,
Go to the library.
go to the
Yeah.
library. There was nothing in the library. I can
Right.
tell you, there was no how-to information in the libraries whatsoever. There was no internet. Where would you go to find out where you could even purchase, I don't know, a piece of mylar or a plastic? It was literally impossible. And so now we just go into Google or you go to Amazon. You can, I mean, I buy the craziest stuff on Amazon. Kitchen sink. I bought a kitchen sink. I bought toilets. I bought materials, brass tubing, welding. It's like everything, and it's like there in a couple of days, maybe even sooner.
Right.
And then combine it with YouTube, which tells me, I can change the handle, my handle of my car door, and how to do it, and I can order that on Amazon. And it's like, what?
It's
So
mind blowing.
that is revolutionizing this maker sphere. So even though maybe not as many people are, those who are have superpowers now that they didn't have before.
I mean, it's so funny you mention this because I ran into the same thing just a few days ago. I am somebody that I find what you just said so fascinating about the counterbalance between being in the mind and the creative aspect of the mind and actually using the hands. And I think I personally lack that. And that actually ends up creating some sort of like energy gaps within myself, I've noticed. It's like when you can really take something from a place of knowledge and understanding and then move into your body and actually do something with it with your hands, and that kinesthetic like connection, it's completely different. And I need to actually individually work. So this is like personal mental note to do more of that, because the other day I went to YouTube to learn how to do something, and right in the description, all the pieces that I needed
Yeah.
were linked up for me elegantly. Click, 1 day delivery, there the next day, references back to the YouTube video, and got the whole job done in 10, 15 minutes.
Right. It's an
Remarkable.
incredible pleasure when you do it. It's like, I just did that. And that is the superpower that you can extend it. And the thing is that there's more of that than you know about. And it's not just sort of the simple guy in a garage or a makeup artist showing it. It's brain surgeons who are going to YouTube to learn how to do the newest brain surgery because their peers are posting on YouTube how they
Right.
did this thing. And so it is phenomenally powerful. And people might not believe the extent to which it's possible that they can do something that normally would have required a professional. Now, professionals can do things faster. They have all the tools at hand. You're not going to do it as fast as one, and maybe as neat, but sometimes you don't need to. I like the artist Tom Sachs in New York, who has a kind of a do-it-yourself aesthetic, where he actually likes to leave the evidence of repairs and things and not try to hide them.
Huh.
He finds them beautiful, and there is a kind of beauty in the homemade in this world. And so, if you modify a bought thing, you've got some weird thing taped to your phone or whatever, it is possible to find beauty even in that they don't look slick, but there is a beauty in that if you are appreciative of it.
And I have to acknowledge your YouTube, Kevin. After we talked last time, I went deep on your YouTube videos, and I do hope you keep that up because they're an amazing, amazing resource. I mean, you're talking about things that I know you've talked about over the years, and then you get this one video where you do a deep dive on a topic, and it's perfect. It's amazing. And as a techno optimist and a futurist, it must be so cool for you to see these things, as you said, that a brain surgeon is going to YouTube to learn because they have access to some of the best information in the world that they never had before, or even as an individual just being able to go to YouTube and combining that with Amazon
Sure.
and receive things the next day. Kind of thinking more in that line, in terms of how you see the future unfolding with some of these things. It must be very exciting to see that. So on the one hand, I'm curious, as you've been thinking ahead and as you've been sort of analyzing what already exists, when you think of Protopia, which is something you've talked about a lot, not a utopia, but in terms of a Protopia, what is your ideal vision for how you see things sort of working out? And what is the worst version of dystopia that you fear?
Mm, okay. So I would just wanted to, for the benefit of the listeners, to kind of run by my definition of Protopia.
Please.
So the concept of utopia is sort of well known. It's a mythical place where things are perfect, and maybe not super perfect, but they're all in harmony, and there is this glad place where um, we're in control of our own futures, and problems are at a minimum. And at the other end is dystopia, which is what most Hollywood movies are about. It's the end of the world. The robots are taking over, rising up and going to kill us, or we're going to suffocate ourselves with climate change and then drown. There are a lot of dystopian scenarios. And I think neither of those are very likely. But I propose a third future, which is called Protopia. And that pro comes from progress, proceeding, the pro in being affirmative, prototyping as being in early. And what Protopia is slight improvement over today. It's where tomorrow is a little tiny bit better, but every year is a little tiny bit better. And that tiny bit is accumulative and compounded over time. And another part of Protopia says that there will be almost as many new problems as solutions, but that the problems propel progress, that the problems are opportunities, and that we make progress by having problems. And that new technologies will be needed to solve the problems that technology makes, and that we can't stop technology. That stopping it is not the solution to the problems of technology. I make one final analogy, which is that technology is kind of like thinking itself. It's a concrete thinking. It's a thinking out. And that if there is a technology that's dumb or harmful, we would no longer ask ourselves, it's like having a dumb idea. So the proper response to a dumb idea is not to stop thinking or to think less. It's to have a better idea, to think more. And so the proper response to a dumb or hurtful technology is not less technology or to stop technology, is to have better technology. So that's what we get with better technology and new problems made by that better technology is Protopia. And so your question, which is, okay, what would Protopia look like? What would a world of high tech, ubiquitous artificial intelligence, ubiquitous genetic engineering, ubiquitous surveillance, ubiquitous cities? What is? Can we imagine a world that we actually want to live in with all that? And I think we can. And I'm trying to articulate that, and I don't think I can sum it up right now, but I believe that the forces at work over the next 100 years can lead us to a society, a global society. First of all, that would be the first thing I say, is that we are becoming globalized no matter what. No matter what happens between China and the US, we're going to be more global. No matter what happens with nationalists and others who are against globalization, it doesn't matter. This force is it's inevitable. It's way too big. We're going to make one machine connect ourselves together. We'll have a single economy, global economy. We will have less people on the planet. That's also highly likely that there'll be a demographic implosion as every modern society reduces their fertility rate, and nothing we have done anywhere has reversed that. I mean, it could be, but I'm just saying culturally we don't seem to be choosing that.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a smaller population, and that requires a kind of slightly different kind of capitalism, because
Mm-hmm.
so far all the progress that we have experienced in the world has always been accompanied with increasing population. To have increasing living standards and decreasing population is a whole different game. And that will require a different kind of growth, not a growth in size where you get fatter and fatter, but a growth where you kind of like through evolution, you're growing, like you're maturing, you have a more mature economy. So you're growing the economy in maturity rather than in girth or weight. And I think there's a number of other things where we need or required to have this future that we want. I believe the AIs will be ubiquitous and that we will work with them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a tremendous number of issues and challenges about how we treat them, what role there is, the issues of bias. There are a ton of these things, but we will work with them, and they'll be present, and they'll be plural. There'll be many, 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 many types of cognition. And genetic engineering, the same thing. It's a much slower process than people think, which is good news because it gives us time to figure out what relationship we want to have with designer babies and all the other issues that we'll have. So I am projecting in the next 20 years to this be a boom era of great leap forward. And I think that we can work towards a 100-year future that we desire, which would include, green energy, having clean energy, having clean meat. And I think all these work together to actually make a desirable future is my short answer.
Are you thinking about, I'm just curious as a side note, are you thinking at all about blockchain and cryptocurrency at all lately?
Yeah. I've included blockchain in my scenarios from the very beginning, but I see them the equivalent of like sewage plumbing.
Cool analogy.
Sewage plumbing it's essential for civilization. You can't have a society without it. But it's pretty boring. It's pretty not very sexy. And outside of Bitcoin, I haven't seen any ways in which blockchain is necessarily going to move into our presence. I mean, I think it's a technology that will be in the back offices for the most part. And the thing about Bitcoin, what you want to do is if you imagine that Bitcoin would not make any more money, that it would never ever grow, and maybe even decrease over time, would anybody pay attention to it? And the answer is no. I mean, right now nobody spends Bitcoin. And in fact, the people who have Bitcoin, but by the way, the only way that blockchain has influenced has not affected anybody. There's no app on your phone that runs on blockchain. There is nothing any consumer can use a blockchain for outside of Bitcoin. And Bitcoin has only benefited maybe 2,000 people in the world. Right? I mean, there's some tiny little percent of people who have become Bitcoin whales because of the inflation. If you remove them, and even they aren't spending that money. So that money is sort of a weird, bloated kind of wealth because they're not even dare spending it. They've got maybe billions, but they're not using it either. And the third thing about their kind of wealth is that, okay, take the richest people in the world, the Bill Gates and the Jeff Bezos, their wealth is built through organizations, through huge, their stock price, their net worth is being sustained by hundreds of thousands of people working these large institutions. The wealth of the Bitcoin whales is naked wealth. It's what did they do to earn it? Well, they made a bet.
They made a bet.
There's nothing really, there's no work supporting it or behind it. So if you remove that naked wealth, who would be interested in blockchain? So I'm not bullish on the crypto phase as being revolutionary. I think it's important. I think there's lots of really cool things that we could do with blockchain. The nifties and the art stuff, there's something there, but again, you have to remove out the distraction of that kind of hype of the wealth and say, well, what would it work if people weren't making lots of money from it?
That's right. 100%. Yeah, Bitcoin, as you said, has just become this strange store of value. And as far as blockchain goes, and you look at Ethereum, there's more utility there, and there's a lot of interesting things happening there. And there's the whole realm of decentralized finance that is very interesting as well. And that kind of ties into some of the things you said about globalization being inevitable. And I think that's all really, really fascinating.
I wrote about e-money. I wrote about cryptocurrency in my first book, Out of Control, in 1994, which was published in 94. I wrote it in the early 90s. So I understand the value. So digital cashless currency, it's inevitable, it will happen. But in a certain sense, and there will be lots of fintech, lots of really important things that will come out of having digital currency. Like you should be able to trace, well, you will be able to trace where your money came from, right? This idea that this dollar, we can actually follow that dollar where it's been. I mean, and make it visible.
So China is really moving on this, I'm sure.
Right, exactly.
Well, and we're way behind.
I've been saying for, 5 years that people confuse the kind of anonymity of cryptocurrency as this virtue. And it's like, no, it's not anonymous at all.
Not at all.
You can actually demand true names. And I was predicting that China will make a version of it that they will mandate. Say, you have to use this with your true name. And they will suddenly have, for the first time, a currency that was completely transparent in a sense, at least to them, and what you could track every single transaction. So this was a kind of a thought experiment I was doing a couple of years ago. Could you imagine an economy, a society, where every single transaction was public, was transparent? And at first people would, it's like, well, no, that's impossible. Well, I mean, they would say technically impossible or socially impossible. And I don't think that necessarily is socially impossible. It's like, well, it's a privacy thing. Well, just because it's potentially available doesn't mean it's actually would be available. This is, again, this issue of privacy in public is like, the truth of the matter is most people's lives, nobody cares about. Obscurity is the default for most people. Most people don't care what you spent for lunch. Okay. And the fact that you might be able to make that public, if everybody's lunch was public, is simply something that we could adjust to, that we would have a different way of it's kind of like you go out into the street. When you walk on the street, that's public. Of course, it's not recorded, but if it's recorded, it's a different kind of public. So these issues going forward have to be resolved. But what I'm saying is, don't eliminate from your mind the possibility that there could be an economy in the future where every single transaction is potentially shareable at some level, or the public again is not a binary thing. There could be different levels of public. I want to remind people that one of the most personal things about you is one of the most public things about you, and that's your face. Your face is the most personal thing about you, and it is the most public thing about you. Do you own your face? And what does that mean to own your face? If it's the thing that I use to identify you. So things aren't binary in this world. And so blockchain, I think, is a really important technology that will be used in many ways. But don't confuse it with just Bitcoin, which I think is sort of an exception, a weird exception that's very distracting in many ways.
Yes, very true. Very well said. I'm battling something philosophically, and I'm going to try to put it into words and think to discover what this even is. So bear with me if
You're
this.
thinking out loud. Okay, I like that.
Yes. So I'm an optimist. I believe in your vision of Protopia. And at the same time, I think that our species is battling something philosophically where we're having trouble determining what is objective truth,
Yeah,
what is progress,
right.
and everything is being questioned at a level that is honestly very daunting and scary at times. And it brings up a lot of dystopian thoughts for me when I see some of the exchanges that people are making, some of the intellectual laziness that I see, some of the, these exchanges of liberty for security and the right balance there. And whether we are making progress or not, it feels challenging without
Yeah,
a clear, objective set of standards or rules or
yeah,
measurements
yeah, yeah,
to know where are we? Like, where are we? Are we getting 1% better?
yeah,
And I'm really, there's fears coming up for me that didn't exist a couple of years ago,
yeah, yeah,
It's a
yeah,
challenging time. And I'm curious if I'm
yeah,
viewing
yeah.
this the right way and how a citizen of the world should be viewing this and what they
So
can do.
I would say it's not just you. I would say it's a society at large that is having these doubts or these feelings. And I think for me, it is in part stemming from the fact that we have transitioned from being people of the book to people of the screen. And the thing about books is that they were monumental, they were fixed, it was black on white forever. Um, they had authors who became our authority. So we relied on text law books, the scriptures, constitution, all kinds of written things that were immutable on paper as the source for how we knew things. And that included, of course, the march of science and all the methods and the scientific method that were also printed on paper. And you had published papers that had to be peer reviewed and they didn't change and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's now the past. We've moved now to become people of the screen and moving images. Things are ephemeral and liquid and fluid and floating, never finished, always in process of ongoing, being upgraded and updated. And we don't have authorities anymore. For every expert over here, there's an anti-expert over there. Okay, and so
So true.
that has brought the onus of sort of to us of assembling truth rather than receiving truth. We kind of have to assemble our truth rather than being given it or having revealed or found. And so that process is a new process. It's very contextual. It's variable, probably a skill that we need to be taught, like calculus. And so and we don't even have any adult supervision in it because it's all kind of new. And so I think what we're headed towards more like that of being involved in the fact that we're having new ways that we know things. Okay, a new way that we determine whether we know something or not, and having those agreement on whether something is known or not. I think it's more complicated and complex, but I don't think that it's impossible. Part of the mantra of science is that it's always in flux. Knowledge is temporary, or facts are even kind of always interim in certain sense until proven otherwise, and everything can be proven otherwise. But it gets more and more difficult. I mean, that's again, this is the benefit of the scientific way, is that part of the definition of how we know something or when we know something is that we have to integrate that knowledge into all the other previous knowledge. It's kind of like blockchain, where you're chaining it in
Hmm.
the block of previous knowledge. And as you have more previous knowledge and more knowledge to do it, that block gets more and more dense with connections. And it becomes actually harder and harder to change, to disprove, which is good because some
Hmm.
things like, I believe in an atom, and I believe in the atom, not because I personally have ever seen an atom,
Hmm.
but on the faith of many, many other experts and people and links where that depend on that atom being true. And so it's dragging behind it, the idea of the fact of the atom is dragging behind it at this point, hundreds of years of observations and stories. And it could still be disproved. It could be overturned in the
Hmm.
future. Say, well, there's doesn't exist. It's just a field of vibrating numbers or something. But to do that would require such a huge body of knowledge, and it would have to be accepted by so many people that it's a very big challenge, but it's not impossible. Because if the atom was different, then all the other things it's connected to have to be reinterpreted, and it has to also work with this new version. And so that becomes a really large hurdle, but it's not impossible. So I think we're headed into this era, to answer your question more directly, where we right now are feeling the fact that we have more of a role in deciding what's true than before, because we
Hmm.
don't have the benefit of authorities and the authors in the fixed world of text that we used to have. And that's disorienting. That's another job that we didn't know we had signed up for. And I think it can be exhausting, as you say. I see it as an opportunity to advance the field of how we know things.
Hmm.
We're inventing new ways, and one of those ways is going to be we're going to know things with the help of artificial minds, of AI. That's part of what we're doing is we're going to have many, many other cognitive agencies surrounding us that will help us decide what we know, what's true, what to believe. And, there are ontological issues about relying on those. We're going to make a mind, and how reliable is that mind? Well, in the beginning, it's not going to be reliable, but we know from computer science and other things that we can make systems that are more reliable than any of the parts are. That's what emergence is about.
Hmm.
And so it's very, for me, it's very exciting that we're headed into this era of new ways of knowing, which include new ways of knowing what's around us, or new ways to believe. And the issues of social media, we're in the infancy. Yeah, we're still figuring out. We don't even know what we want out of that.
Hmm.
Do we want to control what people will say or not? Well, we don't know. We basically, what people is that they want they want to control what other people say, but they don't want anyone to control what they say. I mean, that's
That's
basically
right.
what it comes down to.
That's right. Yeah. I want to acknowledge you for what a true optimist you really are, because there's so many opportunities to become fearful and pessimistic with some of the things that we see.
Yeah.
And I think it's the challenge of a lifetime to view such a challenge in a specific micro manner, the way you just did, to say, I view us figuring out new ways of knowing what is true as an opportunity. I don't know many people that would say that ever. And
Yeah,
I just want to acknowledge you for that, because that is hard work. That is what it means to be a pioneer. That is what it means to be a futurist.
yeah,
That's just not easy.
yeah. I think it's very easy to see how things go wrong, and they
Very.
can go wrong in a million ways. But it's much harder to see how things go right. So the unintentional bad consequences are kind of easier to see than the unintentional good consequences. And I think
Hmm.
very often in history has shown that we don't anticipate all the benefits well enough. And so that's part of what, looking into the future without a bias is about, is to try to imagine what are the unintended beneficial consequences of this.
Well, I'm with you. I'm with you, and I do have my moments of doubt, but it's so important. I believe it's critically important to have this perspective in life, because there's not enough of us, and without people like you, I
Mhm.
think we're so easily going to fall into the chaos, and no one will stand up and say, there is an opportunity here, and there is a way through here, and there are these really challenging ontological issues, as you mentioned, that
Oh
are going to
yeah,
come
yeah,
up. I mean, just simple stuff like the designer babies thing. I mean, just, well, that's not that simple, but micro examples like that are just really huge philosophical questions that are going to be
yeah.
very
And
challenging.
I want again to honor and acknowledge the fact that I have a very tech-centric view of the world. I believe the problems of technology are solved by new technologies. But I define technology in a very broad sense to include social structures, social institutions, laws, ethics, which all the things that we have invented with our mind. Um, and I don't want to leave out the fact that these cosmic questions of where we fit into the universe and our role in the universe are not separate from our visions of the future and what we hope and what we want to gain and what we're trying to optimize. And so I think it is important that we do include in thinking about the future things like, how does it make us feel, and
Mm.
what is it really that we're here for as a species or as an individual? What are we trying to maximize in our own lives or lives of the species? And I think these questions will play a pivotal role in how we answer those questions. And so I just want to end with that I think the sort of the
Mm.
soft part of these questions are very, very important. And so
Thank you.
I
Thank you.
appreciate your
Last,
bringing
one
that.
final rapid question for you
Sure.
to give people some excitement about Vanishing Asia. Top favorite countries that you feature, places that you feature in your
Yeah.
books.
One of the ways I like to answer that question is which ones have I returned the most often to? I've never had a bad time in Bali, the island in Indonesia, which of course is famous as a resort, but in fact, part of its great attraction is the fact that it has a very robust, intact, rich culture that the inhabitants are exercising for themselves. And as tourists are just happy, you're welcome to join them, but they're not doing it for the tourists, they're doing it for themselves. And there's a vitality and
That's
authenticity
so
that's
true.
incredibly attractive.
That's so true.
And the second one is the other country that I've gone to the most, return to, is Japan. Japan does things differently, sometimes weirdly differently, but at the same time, there it's one of the easiest countries in the world to travel to and within. So you have this weird combination of being very different and very comfortable and easy and welcoming to travel in. So again, I've never had a boring moment in Japan. And so those are two countries that I would gladly return to at any moment.
Hmm. I've
For,
had some incredible times in Japan as well. I've been back 3 times. I'm curious, what area of what part of the island do you like with Bali?
with
Where do you
Bali,
where do you spend your time?
I've been all over, many occasions. Ubud was for a long time a very attractive place, but it's just really become overrun with traffic and hard.
Yeah.
So these days I'm spending more time kind of in the mid part of the island on the coast, or midway up the west coast, midway up the east coast. Canggu and a couple other places that you still are outside of Ubud or Denpasar, and yet you're not that far away. The north shore of Bali is a little bit more neglected and less trafficked, and still very nice. But the center and the volcanoes are, again, as the pressure for tourism takes over. Again, I have not had a bad experience there either.
Awesome. Kevin, I could talk to you for a few more hours really easily, but I want to be respectful. I know you got a lot to do. I really appreciate this. I hope we do this many times. And everyone listening and watching, absolutely please support Kevin. Become his 1001st true fan.
Yes,
and let's get you to $1 million on Kickstarter and beyond.
Again, I would think of it in terms of 1 million followers would be nice.
There you go. There you go.
We'll take up that conversation at a later time. But thank you for hosting me. I appreciate your accommodating my schedule. And I really appreciate your questions because they are more valuable than answers these days. And so thank you for a great conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate you. All right.
Okay.
Till next time.
Yeah.